Hey, and welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am so enthusiastic about my guest with me today. I've been waiting for this moment to interview such a wonderful lady that I've been following. So it's kind of like I'm a little starstruck right now. But Amber Hearn has joined me on the podcast today to discuss all things carnivore when it comes to us women. So yes, men will learn from this as well today. But I really wanted to bring her on to get a really great perspective and a really great expertise, in my opinion, of someone who's been doing this for now, I believe, over 9 years. Is that correct, Amber?
Over 8 years. I
Over 8 years.
discovered it 9 years ago.
Okay, great. And so I want to thank you for joining me today, and thank you for giving me your time. That's so gracious of you. In my opinion, one of the leading experts when it comes to carnivory, because you've been doing it longer than just this whole new trend that I don't want to call it a trend because it's so helpful, but kind of right now it is a big trend. And so I really think that you have something to offer my listeners, as well as, just people looking into this, especially women, going, how can I do this carnivory approach? And how can I do this in a safe way, or can I do it? And so I wanted to first just get your background, like what brought you into eating an all meat diet, and maybe what was it like before for you? What things were you dealing with?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and asking me. My background was already a low carb diet. I was on a low carb diet since 1997 when I discovered it, and I already had weight problems at that time, and I went on a low carb diet for that reason.
Okay.
But 12 years later, if you fast forward to the end of 2008, I had gained weight. I had regained weight problems, and I'm not sure exactly why. I think that part of it was that I gained weight during pregnancies, and then that weight didn't come off as well, and then I was slowly regaining as well. And so I was at a point of great frustration because I had researched ketogenic diets, or what they were just called low carb diets back when I first started, and weren't necessarily highly ketogenic, although they were in practice ketogenic. So I had been studying it for a really long time and had been following the research and was really excited about I will call it a trend, the trend of increasing awareness of the health benefits of it. And yet I had this kind of dissonance going on because even though I felt quite healthy, I didn't look like the picture of success. And even though I knew a whole bunch of things about its effect on, say, diabetes or heart disease, I felt like I wasn't a very good advocate for it, especially in my personal life.
Okay.
And so, and at the same time, I was feeling very frustrated, and from a vanity perspective, I wasn't very happy with how I looked.
Right.
So I don't even remember how, I originally happened upon this forum called Zeroing In on Health that was active at that time. And that consisted of a variety of people who had a similar background to me. That is, they were already on board with a low carb diet, but they weren't getting the results that they wanted. And they had tried this all meat approach, and it had worked wonders for them. And I thought, well, I could do that. I could just do that for a little while, lose the weight I wanted, and then go back to my previous diet, which was pretty good for maintenance. So that was how I first heard about it, and why I wanted to try it.
Well, that is the reason. When I heard your story before, I think a lot of women can relate to that feeling of like just the frustration building of, I feel like I'm doing the right things, but why am I not getting the results? And people might think it's just weight, it'll come, try this and try that. But when it comes to a woman and her perspective of her body and her shape and her size, sorry, my door was opening there for a second. It's so hard to as a woman to feel good in your own skin when you've tried everything and you're just looking for any kind of answer. And so I think a lot of women can relate to that feeling of, yeah, it might be aesthetic and I'm just looking for those vanity pounds to come off. But when you don't feel good in your own skin, it's like you can't do anything in life to feel worthwhile. And so it is important. It is something that I appreciate you telling that side of the story, because I think a lot of people go into this with health, like major health issues, and that's why they turn to it. But sometimes it's just as little as something has got to work because nothing is. So it's really encouraging that you found that for yourself.
Right. So I don't want to minimize the trouble that overweight men have, because I know that not looking the way you want to look is hard on everyone.
Sure.
But I do think there's maybe an extra edge on that for women who seem to be judged more on the way they look than anything else
It's
sometimes.
true. Yeah, very true.
And that feeling of desperation I had noticed over the years. If you looked in my cupboard, I had all these different supplements that I had tried. Like I would hear of I don't know, like coconut oil or something and say, oh, that must be the answer. Or maybe I
Right.
have candida. So I would try these candida supplements, and just this point of desperation where I
Preach it.
felt,
Yeah, preach it. I think we've all
I'm,
been at that point, especially as women. Yeah, we don't want to minimize it for men either, but I think it is true more so for women because we are more looked at upon as you have to be a certain shape and size. If you don't look like Shape magazine, then something's wrong with you, you know? And
mhm.
and who among us hasn't had those moments when we're like, I've done everything and nothing's working, and I've tried every supplement and I don't get to see those results I'm looking for. So yes, please tell us like how you came into feeling good in your skin once again.
Well, I decided to try it, and it, even though I'd been on a low carb diet for a long time, this idea of eating only meat seemed really intimidating to me from the outset. So I really thought about it and kind of planned it for about 3 weeks while I was just getting my head psychologically into it.
Yeah.
um, the plate seemed so empty, and I thought I might be bored, and the way I wanted to do it was without any spices at all and really austere sounding.
Yeah, I
And
love that you say that because so many people I've heard that from people when they have seen, me going into trying this or other people I know trying this going, well, aren't you bored? Isn't that there's nothing on your plate? There's one thing. Like what am I going to do if I try that? I don't think I can do that. You hear all of that. So,
yeah, key for me at the time was making it really a time limited experiment,
oh,
because I
good.
thought I
Hmm.
could I'm going to do this. I planned to do it for 3 weeks. I planned to end it on my birthday and
Hmm.
have a celebratory birthday cake. And, and so it was all very much planned in that it was going to be temporary. And that was part of how I was going to get through it. But
And
what
so what
happened?
happened? Yeah, what happened at your birthday? That's what I want to know.
Well, first of all, the weight just started dropping off. I think initially I was losing a pound every day or every other day.
Yeah,
And so I was very pleased about that. And
sure.
I felt really good, and my palate adjusted really quickly. So the first couple days, I have to admit, were kind of bland.
Mm,
But within a very short time, I started to be able to taste the actual meat better. And it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought.
yeah.
But then what was really compelling for me and what changed my life basically was that my mood improved, and the
Oh,
stability of my mood improved, and I just felt so much better than I had felt for a really, really long time.
fantastic.
So I wasn't anticipating this. My mood was never a part of the reason that I was going to try it. A lot of people now who are trying a carnivorous diet are hearing all these anecdotes about things that it improved for people, but I
Hmm.
think most of the people who started it back when I started it went there for the weight loss, and these other things that happened weren't part of what anyone was expecting. They were just unexpected bonuses, and that was
Yeah.
certainly true for me.
So
So
after the 3 weeks, like what happened at your birthday? Did you have the cake or no?
no, no. I thought, wow,
I kind
I'm
of knew
not.
you were going to say that.
Here I am
Yeah.
in 2018.
Because you felt the difference. And so there was a part of you that was like, I don't want to not stay the course. I want to continue. I don't want the cake to derail me. Was that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, it had no pull at all at that
So there
point.
was no craving for it either.
No,
Oh,
no.
awesome. Very good.
It was easy.
Yeah,
It was easy.
that's very
And so I just want to backtrack a little bit about the
sure.
depression thing and just tell you a bit more about that, because I had had problems with depression since I was 20, which I guess was 1992 or 3. So before I was 20, I was born in 1973. So I'd been on antidepressants and they didn't really help all that much,
Yeah.
but I didn't have any other recourse. And I think the zeitgeist, the idea about depression at the time and maybe still now, is that it's an imbalance in your brain, like a biochemical imbalance, and so you need to address that with drugs.
Hmm.
And there's nothing you can do about it. And when I think about that now, I think, well, what is an imbalance a reflection of? It's kind of a set point, in the same way that your hormonal system or your weight system might be a set point and it's off. And so if you give an antidepressant, that might temporarily change
Right.
what's going on biochemically with neurotransmitters. But if your body has this idea of what the neurotransmitter set point is supposed to be, then it's going to juggle around that new stimulus. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of why it wasn't effective.
Sure.
But then as time progressed, I started, and I think actually it had to do with the antidepressants. I
Mm.
started having other mood problems and was eventually re-diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2,
Wow.
which uh, sounds very serious, but I was actually really happy to have this new diagnosis, because I thought, oh, well, no wonder my depression's never gone away. I've never been treated properly. They've been, treating me for the wrong disease.
Sure.
But then then I tried a whole bunch of different bipolar medications, and the side effects were worse than the disease in many cases, and it didn't really help me.
Yeah.
So all this was going on, and that was in the background. And it's funny because I considered myself a very healthy person, but it never occurred to me to think of a psychiatric disorder as something that could be addressed with diet. It just didn't, I don't know, I had this disconnection between the brain and the rest of the body that is very common
I
with
get that a
autoimmune.
lot in my nutrition practice when I work with
Yeah.
someone that has depression and I want to try, upping their protein or upping their amino acid supplementation. And they go, how is diet going to affect my depression or my anxiety? And like everything is affected by our diet. We just don't realize that. I mean, our gut is our information superhighway. And so everything comes in there and has to be filtered out to the rest of our body. And so I think it's so real. What you're saying is there is like a disconnect of people that don't understand the power of nutrition. And when it comes to like meat, I'm hoping you can touch on like that maybe you feel the same way I do, is that the high content of amino acids is really building those neurotransmitters in the brain and making us have that even keeled feeling. So I hope you'll touch on that too.
Sure. Yeah. When I first went to a doctor for depression back when I was about 20, um, the doctor, I told the doctor I wanted to try to address it in a natural way, and she kind of almost laughed. I think she was stifling it and trying to be, positive. But she
Sure.
said, "Okay, you can try that first." And she recommended that I eat more protein more frequently and gave me some vitamin recommendations. And
Mm-hmm.
I did that, and it didn't really have an effect. And I think that protein is important, but changing your diet in a small way that just gives you more nutrients, it can be helpful if you're having a deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to the power of changing your whole metabolic system so that you're primarily fat burning instead of primarily carb burning, I think has much more drastic effects on the way the system works. And so I think that without a certain level of a ketogenic metabolism, dietary therapy is going to be less effective unless it really is a matter of a deficiency.
Yeah.
But I do think that the components of meat, and not just amino acids, but the fatty acids that are
Right.
available, is
Yeah.
really, really important for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the whole evolution of our brain was dependent on our ability to eat meat,
Mm-hmm.
to get meat, and to send those nutrients to our brains.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that perspective because it is more than just the immediate change to, like, there's been plenty of people that have tried just upping their protein, but I also wonder if it's to do with healing the gut from all of the damage that maybe certain plant-based foods can cause people, and you make what I think 70% of your serotonin in your gut to then be transmitted to the brain, which is that feel-good neurotransmitter. So if the gut's in distress because of certain plant-based foods that don't resonate with you, then it is a difference than just adding protein, but also eliminating those things that could be causing the gut reaction too. And like you said, the fatty acids are so critical to brain health as well. So how long after you started all meat were you able to, I mean, I'm assuming you were able to go off your medication and experience that high of, it's just me, I'm happy again?
Well, it's funny. I was on a low dose of a medication at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I probably would have stayed on it indefinitely, except that very soon after my birthday, I realized I was pregnant.
Oh.
Yeah. So I immediately went off all my medications
Yeah.
because they weren't known to be safe for pregnancy. And so I had a bit of a derailment of the diet at that time. I I can remember I suddenly got carbohydrate cravings. It
Right.
was maybe another week later. I don't remember exactly, but I have this memory of sitting on the couch doing nothing but kind of trying not to think about carbs. And that lasted a couple of days, and then I went,
Yeah,
okay.
I can see how that would work. Yeah.
I think the body is just so driven in the first trimester to put on fat,
Sure.
and that was my body's known way of doing that.
That's a great
That's my
perspective. I
explanation.
never, yeah, that's a perfect explanation. I think that really validates that feeling for a lot of women in that first trimester of like, why am I so ravenous? So yeah.
Yeah. So I capitulated, and I ate a lot of carbs for the first trimester, and then after that, well, I have a family history of hyperemesis gravidarum, which is
Yes.
where you're so nauseated during the whole pregnancy that it's very hard to keep food down.
Even some people get hospitalized, correct?
Yeah, my
Yeah.
mother did, and other family members. I
Wow.
fortunately, I don't know if I just got less of it genetically or if it had to do with my diet, but I never, in any of my pregnancies, needed to be hospitalized.
Oh, perfect. Good.
And yeah, and I was able to keep a lot of stuff down. And I did have this kind of triage idea where even though I don't think carbs are necessarily that healthy, I was going to eat what I had to eat in order
Mm-hmm.
to eat.
Yeah.
But then as the pregnancy went on, I gradually went lower and lower carb, and eventually by the last trimester I had some zero carb days, but I wasn't really carnivorous again until after the birth. And then within, I think, less than a week, I said, okay, I'm ready now to start this again.
And so
And
was this your third pregnancy at this time?
it was, yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
And so if you think back to the first two, how different was this one versus the first two? Like how different was the typical, like, really severe morning sickness that you got versus the first two? And how difficult or how different was the recovery as well? Like, did you find that zero carb or all meat actually helped you with this pregnancy recover faster?
I don't know if it did. In my first couple pregnancies, I stayed I stayed on that high carb sort of binge for pretty much the entire pregnancy, and I'm not sure why. Um, I'm really not sure if
Mm-hmm.
the zero carb carnivorous aspect that I had sort of preloaded with before the pregnancy had the effect of
Okay.
me getting back to a low carb diet sooner,
Mm-hmm.
or if it was just more my confidence and desire.
Sure. The results you'd seen, kind of seeking those again, kind of thing.
Right. And I
Yeah.
was a lot more confident about the safety of ketogenic diets during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really worried. Even by the first one, I felt like I know this is healthy for me, so why would it be unhealthy? And I had done some research. But by that was back in 2000, so there wasn't a lot known.
Yeah.
And by this time in 2009, I just felt a lot more confident. And I
Yeah.
felt more confident about my own body and about pregnancy in general, just from the experience of having had them before.
So then from that point on, that's your 8 years. Like from that, after that pregnancy, you were then just full carnivore from then on.
Right. And as regards the medications, since I was breastfeeding and I had been off the medications since I started the pregnancy, as soon as I went back on the carnivorous diet, my mood stayed stable, and I never had occasion to go back to the doctor and say, I think I might need meds again.
Wow. That's
So that
fantastic.
was lucky, yeah.
And so you actually felt the difference too. Like you felt more like, would you say happier than you had before, ever before, or at least since you were in your 20s?
Yeah, my mood was stable and higher,
Yeah.
as I mean happier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And over the course of the 8 years, like, have you seen other things change over time, or did it all just kind of get better that at that first, go around, or have things steadily improved even up to now?
That's a great question. Since it's been so long, I've had a lot more occasion to experience the normal ups and downs of
Mm-hmm.
emotion. I've had traumatic things happen in my life, and I've gotten to experience that from a more stable point of view. And I've had
Mm-hmm.
some real points of sadness, but it was qualitatively different to experience sadness and grief without that really pathological kind of psychiatric depression.
Mm-hmm.
Is It was interesting, having had those experiences with depression. The first few times that something made me sad, it was kind of scary because I didn't know, is this going to turn into depression? What's going to happen? Am I going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out to be doable.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And as
I-
far as like, digestive wise and just energy wise, like, did things improve that way too? Like, did you notice that as well?
It's interesting that you brought up the gut, because a lot of people who are trying carnivorous diets are doing it because they had very very noticeable and distressing gut problems,
Sure.
where with digestion causing bloating and causing pain. And I never had that kind of digestive issue, and so I never thought it had anything to do with the gut. So
Mhm.
I can't really say I've had improvement, because there was really nothing that was bothering me in the first place. But a lot of people have had
Mhm.
improvement with IBS or IBD.
Yes, that's true.
And
Um,
then,
yeah, go ahead.
um, as you pointed out, there's so much going on with the microbes that we're just really beginning to understand about the connection between, say, the gut and the brain. I don't know exactly what things are causal, and I think that a lot of the data we have about, for example, what kind of strains are associated with what kind of diseases in high carbohydrate diets,
Mhm.
I don't think that we can necessarily apply the exact analysis that we were finding to people on a carnivorous diet. But I'm certainly nowadays in a place where I'm much more comfortable saying there could be a gut um, a gut component to the psychiatric problems that I was experiencing,
Sure.
even if it wasn't manifesting in digestive issues.
Right. Even if you weren't feeling it, it could have still been going on to where it was just not really a symptom for you other than the brain issue or something. And so like from a female perspective, because it's such a big topic now I feel like the female community is jumping on board and realizing, hey, even if I'm not going to do full carnivory diet, maybe I do need to increase my red meat consumption, because that's kind of always been, looked down upon, as women should be eating their chicken breast and their tuna and things like that. But I really want to bring forward like this big platter of red meat to women and go, this is what we need to be eating, even maybe more so than men, because we've got a lot more work to do inside of our bodies than men do. We're carrying babies. We're higher stress, I feel like, than men are. So we have more needs than they do. Men are, kind of even keeled and don't really have as many issues, I feel like, as women do. And so can you talk about, like, as you went on through your 8 years, like up to now, how it's been for you, like as a female in a circle of people eating the standard American diet and you're eating this way? Like, what approach did you get, and how did you deal with the female dogma of low fat, chicken breast?
Well, I completely agree with you that women seem to have stronger nutritional needs because we're all the time, at least before menopause, we're all the time in a state where our bodies want to be prepared to carry a whole other life. And so
Yeah.
our nutritional demands are intense. And I think red meat in particular is one of the most nutritional things you could possibly eat. And so it's a terrible irony, I think, that our society has this view of a woman eating just a salad and minimizing red meat. You
Right.
might see steaks are much more associated with men, and
Yeah, unfortunately.
it's really strange. There was a long time where, when I was still just on a regular low carb diet, my husband and I, whenever we would go to a restaurant, his preferred meal was usually chicken, and I would usually order steak even back then. And essentially every time the waiter would come and put the chicken in front of me and the steak
Right.
in front of him,
Right.
it's just so ingrained.
Yeah, we need to change that, Amber. We need to change that mentality.
I think we should get a bunch of people together and take pictures of women eating steak.
Yeah, instead of like
Yeah.
burn your bra, we need to like burn a bunch of steaks that like just medium well and like serve them to lots of women. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
as far
fun.
as like the like, how did you get past the social stigma of like doing all meat
I think
as a
I
woman?
have a bit of an advantage in that I've always been a bit of a saucy iconoclast and not
Oh, I
worried too
like
much
that
about what
term.
people think about that. So it didn't really bother me in that way. I do have to say, though, that I was a little bit shy when I first started out. Just the whole idea of eating only meat. My husband was really excited about it. He thought it was pretty cool. And so every time we would see someone we hadn't seen, he'd say, "Amber's eating only meat." And I'm
Wow.
like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it."
Yeah, a great way to open that can of worms, huh?
um, but I eventually got over the shyness, and it became matter of fact. In restaurants, it can be tricky. Just for one thing, I've always been that kind of person who didn't want to make a scene or stir up trouble. And so I wouldn't want to, ask for a special thing at a restaurant. It feels like I'm kind of bothering people. So it, I had to turn into that person who gives the waiter a whole list of the special requirements they
Yeah,
have.
I'm that person too, so it's okay.
I got over it, and I realized that they're there to provide me a meal, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's their job, and it's not a big deal.
So, but
But
as far, oh, go ahead.
it's sometimes tricky in a restaurant because if you just ask for what you want and say, "Don't bring me this and don't bring me that," they'll keep asking, "Oh, well, do you want this instead, or you want that instead? Do you want potatoes?" Or you so finally I started saying right at the outset, "I don't eat plants, so just bring me this."
Oh, good
And
idea. Yeah.
often that works, although some minority of time people think that you said the opposite of what you said because they're just not expecting it.
Right.
And often they don't seem to realize right away that yes, bread is a plant, because they want to keep offering. It's like when we were talking at the beginning about how austere it seems to just have that one thing on the plate. From the restaurant's perspective, it seems that they might not be pleasing you if they bring you such an empty
Right.
looking dish. Um, so they'll try to dress it up.
Yeah. And you're
Um,
like, I know, I just want steak on a plate. Like, just put the steak on the plate. You won't offend me. Like, I
yeah,
won't be looking for more.
nothing else please than the fattiest
Yeah.
piece you have.
That's right. Yeah. And so I want to touch on that too. But before we get to that, like, how about your social circle? Where I know you said your husband was supportive, but like your family, did they ask you a lot of questions? Like, why are you doing this? Or, how was that well received, or was it, you know?
My family tends to be pretty supportive, and they thought it was weird, and I'm sure they thought I would get over it soon, and um, didn't necessarily think it was healthy, but they didn't challenge me or bother me about it. I've had a few friends who kind of harass me every time I see them, but
Gotten
we're
used to it.
okay. We're at a truce. Yeah,
After 8 years, I guess they
that's
really
what you want to
understand it
do.
now.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah.
And then since you mentioned the cuts of meat, I also wanted to, from a female perspective, because you'll see people like, and I greatly respect Sean Baker, but he has like 4 to 6 pounds of meat a day. If a female does that, bad things are going to happen. So I want women to understand, like, and I get this question a lot, is like, well, how much meat should I eat and how much fat versus protein? So can you kind of explain like your typical day? And I know N equals 1 with all of us, but in a general term, like, how do you feel like women are to figure out their ratios?
One of the most important things about the carnivorous movement is the idea that you shouldn't be using your frontal cortex to figure out what you want to eat.
I
You
love
should
that. I
just,
love that.
yeah, if you're eating the right thing, then we've evolved to this certain point where hunger should be fairly in line with what you actually need. And so the encouragement is to keep eating as long as you're hungry and not worry about how much you ate. And for most people, that amount that you eat will be exactly what your body needs. And if you're overweight, your weight will still come down, even if you're eating a lot. I think there was a period soon after I started. So let's see, my baby was born. My baby, he's 8, but he was
Oh,
born in October. And some point the following spring, I recorded everything I ate for about 3 months.
okay.
And that was a pain because you have to weigh everything and you have to guess, and it means you can't really have an omelet because how much of the bacon ended up in the egg. um, so,
Spoken like a
so
true female, man.
but I made the best guesses that I could, and it
Sure.
came out to somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day,
Wow.
about 2
Awesome.
pounds of meat, and I was losing weight.
Mhm.
So I think that was a really good lesson for me to trust my body,
Mhm.
and I think that it's a really good way to live, because if you're constantly worrying about whether you're eating too much, it it gets in the way of living, and it gets in the way of trusting your body's signals to be telling you what it needs.
I think that's such an appropriate statement because, like, when I first started this course, I'm only 3 months into it and you're 8 years. But the first go around for me was just ate like, okay, I'm just going to do this. Like exactly what you said. I'm not going to use ratios or anything. I'm not going to use my prefrontal cortex. I'm just going to eat. And I was eating a ton of protein, like, and good fat too. But I don't think I was hitting the right amount of fat. I think I was so focused on the meat and not the fat. And so I started like filling out, like But at the same time, I felt amazing. Like everything I was doing felt amazing. Everything was changing that had never changed in years for me. And, my story is more along the lines of I had a toxic mold exposure last year for about 6 months that really derailed all of my health. Like everything went down the tubes in 6 months. And so I became hypothyroid and everything. And that's when I was like, I have to heal this in the most extreme way I know how. And this looks really interesting now that I've looked into the research. So I'm going all meat. So I did it, and my thyroid readjusted within a month, which was really cool. My
Wow,
period
that's
came back and
intense.
everything. But at the same time, like I had put on weight, and that, as a nutritionist, I'm like, I can't go out in public and people see me with weight on, but I feel too good to stop doing this. So what I had to realize was, I think there is a point with women where you might start something like this and put on a little bit of weight, or in your case, you actually lost. But I think for some women, they need to realize this isn't a weight loss diet. It's more of a healing mechanism.
You're
Like,
right.
and for me, it was, I needed to build tissue. I needed to put bone mass back on. I needed to put muscle mass back on that I lost because of my detriment that I'd been through. And once I did that, and then once I found that maybe I was doing too much protein, I backed off a little and then upped my fat majorly. So it wasn't that I cut calories, and that's when the weight started coming off. But I could tell that it was like that residual fluff. It wasn't the mass I'd put on. It wasn't the bone mass. Like I was so glad I stayed the course. So I wanted to put that out there for women who are like, this isn't working for me. I'm putting on weight. I think for a lot of us, we were so malnourished by the diet dogma and the Shape magazine diets that we actually have to put some mass on before we're going to take some weight off. And I don't know
Yeah,
if you've talked to people that have experienced that as well, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I have. And I do think that getting enough fat can be an adjustment, especially if you've come from the school of thought where you're trying to reduce fat. The amount of fat that you need to be eating with your meat might seem a lot more than you would have expected, because if you're not getting any energy from carbs, all of your energy should be coming from fat. The protein should be what's there for building your structures. It's not really contributing much to the energy equation.
Mm-hmm.
And then even if you're coming from a ketogenic diet, you might be used to getting most of your fat from, say, salad oil
Yeah,
or butter
plant
on your
oils.
veggies, right?
Yeah,
And
avocado. Yeah.
so if suddenly you're eating just fairly lean steaks or leaner meat, you might start to, in order to satiate yourself from an energy perspective, be eating more protein than is really necessary. And so I'm not at all against the idea of tweaking the ratios to try to find the place that's most comfortable for you, as long
Mm-hmm.
as it doesn't, become an end goal in itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
I think you were spot on when you said, you tracked for a short amount of time just to figure out where you were. It is good to just have that, I do that with my clients. I'm like, track what you're doing for just like 2 weeks, just to create an awareness. I don't want you to get so dogmatic about it that you have to be strictly in this calorie range, because we have different demands every day of our life. We have different stresses that we're under. We have different cellular changes happening on any given day, especially as women, hormonal changes. So there's going to be some days when we have many more calorie needs than the other. And to set a standard of 1,500 calories every single day, I'm just like, this is like not rocket science, that this isn't common sense. We shouldn't be living this way. So I think that another way that this carnivory is going to help women is by giving them a little freedom to just eat intuitively, like you said, without the
it
prefrontal cortex.
really is freeing.
Yeah.
About the weight gain, I have definitely heard of people who initially gain.
Mhm.
Very often that seems to be from people who have had a background of a lot of caloric restriction. And like you said, I think that probably is the body saying, oh, now's our chance to build tissue. And
Mhm.
maybe also we're going to keep this fat because who knows whether there's going to be calorie restriction again.
Yeah.
Um, but for a lot of people that does recede. My own weight experience has been a fluctuation from about, I'm going to say 128 maybe pounds at the low end to 145 at the high end. And I don't even really know what that's from. It doesn't seem to track very closely to the amount that I'm eating.
And
But
that's
just to
over the
have that
8 years,
fluctuation.
that,
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
that 8 years, you just kind of go between. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really prefer the 128. I'd probably actually want 125 if I had my druthers. But like you said, I feel like the diet that I'm on is creating health and
Yeah.
healing in my body. And I'm at the point where I'm not willing to mess with that in order to try to meet some other goal.
Yeah, sometimes when you feel as amazing as you do, like it's like aesthetics become second, whereas maybe before, at least in my case, when I back in my bodybuilding days, I was all about aesthetics. And so it's like I look back on that and I was like I was miserable inside. Like outside I looked pretty good, but inside my body I was like miserable. Like I hated life and I hated what I ate, and it was low fat and whole wheat Ezekiel bread, and I hated it. And so it's like fast forward to now, and it's like, yeah, I could go back to that and get like this like chiseled body, but at the same time I feel so amazing that's no longer an issue for me. Like, and I think that's where a healthy woman is coming to. A healthy woman needs to go, this isn't about how I look. This is about how I feel and how I interact with my children and how I interact with my family and how I can put good out into the universe because I feel good, and I can do the things that bring me joy and also serve other people because I'm not tired and I'm not sickly and I'm not, mad at myself because I ate a cookie, so
Right.
I just think that this not only is the carnivore diet very healing, but it's also very empowering for women to be able to maybe eat things they haven't been told they should, and then also feel in a way that maybe they thought was wrong to feel. Like, I have more muscle, I have more tissue. Is that wrong? Like, should I not be this thick? No, you can be that thick. Your body needs that. So
Yeah. And I still care about the way I look. I'm interested in weightlifting and getting more chiseled, but the standard, I think, of thinness is so, it may be a little bit less body fat than the range of normal healthy females in the first place. And I've started to come to appreciate that a lot of the women that I think look super fantastic actually aren't as thin as I put the pressure on myself to be.
very good. Yeah, that's true. Um, so coming back around to more of another female perspective, like, did you see a difference in like your female aspects in general, like your female issues, like period, menstruation, all of that? Like, did that change for you in the 8 years?
It didn't change very much. The I have I have endometriosis, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it until quite recently, before my zero carb diet, but not very much before. And I was really hoping that that would be one of the things that would improve drastically. And I would say it improved a bit. I have less pain. um, I don't have any pain. And I
That's
had a
fantastic.
little bit. In fact, that was part of the reason that I didn't know I had endometriosis, because, well, people don't talk about what normal periods are very
Yeah,
much.
I
What
know.
I had, I learned about my reproductive system, and I feel like I was pretty well educated in what menstruation is and what it does.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of really intimate details of what a normal period looks like and feels like
Yeah.
weren't is that was something that I never got information about. And so the only thing that I knew about endometriosis growing up was it was this thing that caused people to be in so much pain that it would knock them out for days. And I
Right.
never really had a lot of pain with my period. So every time I would have a symptom that could be related to endometriosis, I immediately said, well, it can't be that because I don't have that. And it was only much later that I finally put it all together. I was having vaginal pain during,
Oh.
I guess, during ovulation. This was a
Mhm.
new symptom. And so I looked that up, and one of the things was endometriosis. And instead of doing that immediate, okay, well, I don't have that, I thought, well, what exactly are the symptoms of endometriosis? And I started
Mm.
looking into it and realizing that I had so many of them. And
Wow.
I went to a doctor, and we didn't do the only way you can really confirm that is by putting a camera in to see,
Yeah, the
because
laparoscopy, I think it's called.
yeah, exactly. And I didn't really want to do that. So she said, with your symptoms, I pretty much say it's 99% sure you have that. And do you want to go on the pill? Because that's the best way to, the pill that you constantly have progestin so that it prevents you having a period, and then
Right.
you don't have the symptoms. And I couldn't do that because I'd been on that before, and that exacerbated my depression. So I
Yeah.
just said, well, okay, no, I know what I have now, and there's nothing I can do about it.
But that's so cool that you don't have pain with it, because I was diagnosed with that when I was 16, and man, the pain, like I took 22 ibuprofen in one day to get
Oh
through my
my
periods.
God.
So it's like, and then I gave myself an ulcer. So it's like,
Right.
but that's fascinating that women do probably need to be aware that there's things going on. And it's like you said, we aren't aware because nobody talks about it. It's like this cliche that you can't talk about your period. But at the same time, I read a really good book one time that said that a period at best should be an inconvenience. That's at best. Like, the worst thing about it should be inconvenient. There should be no pain. There should be no heavy bleeding. There should be no clotting and stuff like that. And so if those are happening, there is little symptoms of something else going on. It might not be major, but it's just showing you that your body's not quite optimal. So yeah, I think that from my perspective, like, my period came back after 7 months of being gone, and then I'd lost it for 7 years, quite a while ago. But yeah, it's just a matter of diet can affect your period. I was able to bring it back through a constant gluten-free after 7 years, and then I was able to bring it back after I lost it again for 7 months with the carnivore diet. So I think people need to not only know about how it's going to affect their gut, but also their menstruation as well. So switching gears though, I wanted to talk about going back to your typical day, like the cuts of meat that you eat as a woman, and like what your typical day is like with regard to eating.
I usually eat about twice a day. Occasionally I'll eat 3 times, and occasionally I'll eat 1 time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the meal is just the same whenever I'm eating it, and it tends to be, well, my favorite steak, but I don't actually eat steak for every meal. I eat chicken thighs usually. I recently discovered duck breast, which is much fattier than
Ooh,
chicken breast, and it's absolutely delicious.
that sounds good.
I eat a lot of pork and a lot of fish, but beef is my favorite. Beef is my mainstay.
I
I like
think
my
you
ham.
mentioned that a steak cut that I hadn't heard of before, which was chuck eye. Is there? I've
Chuck
heard of,
eye,
yeah,
yeah.
I've heard of chuck steak. Is that the same thing, or is chuck eye different?
No, it's I don't actually know exactly from the location on the cow exactly what makes it different,
Mm-hmm.
but it is as fatty as ribeye, and I would say almost as good. It's like poor
Ooh.
man's ribeye.
Okay, good. I want to find this and try it. It sounds
Yeah,
amazing.
it's pretty good.
That's very good. And
And
then,
I
so, oh, go ahead.
I like ground beef, but I I don't like ground beef cooked that much, and I've recently discovered that I pretty much prefer ground beef raw or just lightly
You can eat
seared.
raw. Wow. That's
Yeah, it's
something I
kind of a
haven't
new
tried
thing.
yet.
It took me about 5 years before I started branching out into raw, and I don't think it certainly wasn't necessary for any of my healing, but after the first few times that I ate ground beef raw, I realized that I actually prefer ground beef that way.
Wow.
And
And
so
so
I
do
do
you
that
have
from
to do
time to
anything
time.
to it, or you just get it from a source and then you just eat it, or do you salt it? Do you do anything like that? I'm just curious.
I have a favorite shop locally that makes it fresh daily on an ongoing basis, and the thing
Hmm.
I like about it is they single grind it so that it's still kind of chunky and has lots of big pieces of fat.
Wow.
Um, I also have a grinder, and I sometimes do it myself at home, or I will do this thing which isn't exactly ground, but I'll just take a piece of chuck and mince it with a knife by hand very finely. I don't usually put salt or anything on it. I will sometimes sear it, now sometimes put salt on it.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of times I've tried a little mustard on it. I don't normally eat spices at all,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that mustard powder is used in tartare in restaurants, and I
Sure.
thought it would
Yeah.
be fun to try. It was
Oh,
pretty good, but I think I just prefer it plain.
that's amazing. Okay, so I will at some point try that. But right now I'm one of those girls. I think you talked about it on another podcast I listened to where you started off with medium well or well done meat and now you're able to eat it pretty, I mean, like you said, completely raw, but also like when you cook a steak, I guess you do it more of a medium rare or something.
Yes, that's right. Or even
Okay, so I
rare.
want to get to that point because I'm like making mine like a hockey puck to eat it. So I have to like clank it on the counter and then I know it's done. So I guess how did that transition for you?
Well, it was pretty quick to get from well done to medium or medium rare,
Okay.
almost immediately. And I think that's because I wasn't using spices and I wasn't eating anything else. And so I started just really getting in touch with the flavor of the meat. And
Nice.
the rarer it is, I think the more the flavor comes out. The well doneness kind of makes it makes it less flavorful, I find.
Okay.
I really like the sear on it
Mm-hmm.
because that really brings out the umami with
Mm.
that I guess the Maillard reaction
Yeah. Yeah.
that's crisping it up. But
Right.
as far as the inside goes, it was surprising to me because even just a couple years before, I was that person who wanted the well done steak and everyone would roll their
Yeah.
eyes. But I didn't know any better. I grew up in a vegetarian household,
Yeah.
and we just didn't cook meat at home. I had no idea how to cook it, and cooking meat is so different from cooking vegetables. I had no idea what I was doing, and it took a
Yeah.
long time to get better at that. Um,
And then as far as like how do you figure out, I mean, I know you eat more intuitively because you just like eat and you know what it is. Like even now after 3 months, I'm getting to the point where like I know what's going to satisfy me with fat and protein. And then it's true because like I can go 5 or 6, 7 hours with that before my next meal. And there isn't that constant like, oh, I got to have something, or getting to the meal and being so hangry that you yell at everybody trying to get to your plate or something. Like that doesn't happen on this way of eating. And so but talk to me about like how other women could possibly like figure out how to eat intuitively since we're just not used to that.
well, I think it does take trust and practice. So you have to
And trial
see
and
that,
error probably, yeah.
yes, you have to see that you have to go through a period of time where you're eating that way and nothing bad happens.
Yes.
I like the way you talked about not feeling hungry in between meals. I
Mm-hmm.
find that when it's between meals, I don't feel hungry at all, almost ever.
Right.
Sometimes I do,
Right.
but when I sit down and take that first bite, all of a sudden all the appetite kicks in, and
Agreed.
I might have thought, oh, I'm not that hungry, and then I eat 2 steaks or something.
Yeah. And that's funny too, because generally on this way of eating, when I am craving something, it's more of what I'm already eating. Like I'm not craving really outside the box. I mean, occasionally I might get a hankering for like a piece of dark chocolate or something, but it's not
Hmm.
even the chocolate with sweet in it. I just want the unsweetened baking squares or something.
Isn't that
So,
funny? I've
yeah.
eaten those from time to time, and
So then I always go back to the nutritionist in me and I go, oh, I think I need more magnesium, which it happens to be in this other sort of meat. So I guess I need to eat this meat more than what I've been eating. So
it could be. And magnesium comes out in the cooking in the liquid. So if you're not
maybe I'm
eating all the
overcooking.
liquid,
Yeah.
then yeah, that could go out. And I suspect that maybe evolutionarily we were getting more minerals in our water supply.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm not really against supplementation, especially when it comes to minerals that we might
Mm-hmm.
not be getting.
Right. I agree. Yeah. And as far as the the circadian rhythm involved in eating, because I'm a big person is to preach circadian rhythm in a lot of my podcasts and stuff. Do you kind of go with the rhythm of the sun, kind of eat when the sun comes up and don't eat after the sun goes down, or do you just eat based on when you're hungry?
That's really interesting. I've read some papers some time ago. It was a long time ago, so you can tell me if I get this right. I think that you can actually set your circadian rhythm if you eat immediately when you get up. That'll help you to adjust to
Right.
jet lag, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
But the way my current eating pattern is that I usually don't eat in the morning at all. I do
Mhm.
drink coffee, and I will drink that in the morning, but
Coffee
I don't.
girl. Yeah.
Well, it's my plant vice.
Hey, gotta have it. It's not, you're not getting any flack from me. So
But my first meal tends to be somewhere between 11 and 1, um, and then I'll eat later in the evening. I don't tend to eat in the night, and it's not because I've made a decision not to eat at night. I just don't get hungry then.
Mhm.
But I suspect it's probably not that good an idea to eat at night.
Well, like I always look back from like an ancestral perspective, like when I was actually in a third world country one time up in the bush where like they didn't have any electricity. We were there for a couple weeks helping out, and when the sun went down, everybody went to bed. Like it was like 6:30 at night, but the sun had gone down. Where my husband and I are just like, what do we do now? And they're like, everybody went into their little teepees and went to bed. So I'm like, guess we go to bed. And then the cock crows at 4:30 in the morning as the sun's starting to come up, and you just get up. So it's like they didn't eat after that. They ate during the day, and they really didn't eat that much during the morning time. Like you said, they actually like would go to the garden, go to the coconut plantations, collect their food for the day, go fishing, catch it for the village, and everybody ate together while the sun was going down. And then they went to bed. So it was like,
That's really interesting.
yeah, I love
What a
that
great
perspective of,
experience.
yeah, it was in Vanuatu, by the way, if you ever want to kind of look up what they're doing out there. But that was just something that really caught my attention, that maybe us as a society were kind of off on our circadian rhythm. And maybe it is the fact that certain of us don't need to eat right when we first get up, and just intuitively know like, hey, it's 11 o'clock, I'm hungry, I'm going to have something to eat now. Or it's 7 o'clock and you're hungry, maybe you just are that person. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that as well. I know we're almost short on time, but before I let you go, I wanted to ask you another question about a blog post that I read of yours on the nutrient content regarding carnivore, and specifically with regard to vitamin C. But I also want you to touch on like how powerful red meat is when it comes to all the vitamins that are in it. Like I think it's a misconception that meat has a high quantity of bioavailability with vitamins and minerals. So can you touch on that?
Sure, yeah. It is interesting that a lot of the education that we get is that the reason you need to eat the fruits and vegetables is because they're so high in vitamins. And that presents this really skewed perspective because it makes it sound like, oh, well, meat must not be. But
Mm,
that's
right.
not the case at all. Meat is nutrition packed. Even just muscle meat has a lot of the things that we need. There are many micronutrients that are harder to get in muscle meat, and you would have to go to organs. Liver
Mm.
or eggs are honorary organs.
Yeah.
They have a lot of good vitamins in them. But the idea that you need to eat plants in order to make up your whole spectrum of your needed nutrition is definitely a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a problem that I think isn't very widely appreciated about the RDAs for different nutrients. So RDAs were developed by finding out that certain deficiencies could lead to a disease. So people are coming with rickets and you finally figure out that they're not getting enough vitamin D.
Mm.
But the thing is that what a vitamin is a coenzyme for a metabolic process.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're changing the whole way that your body mostly gets energy, then the metabolic processes that are more dominant will be different and will require a different set of nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing where if you're on a low carb diet, all of a sudden your nutrient needs might be different in ways that we don't know empirically because all those deficiency determinations were made on people on high carb diets.
Mm.
And then secondly, if you look at plants, plants very often cause problems with nutrient absorption. So
Right.
all of these
Absolutely.
RDAs are developed where they might be artificially inflated because you were eating a plant that could have meant you needed to get more of this in order to make up for the absorption problem.
Yeah,
But when
and
you
I
take
have
away the
I
plants,
have an experience with that because like before I went to carnivory, I was, and not to say it's a wrong thing for some people, but for me, I was eating a very high plant-based diet. Like I'm talking a head of cauliflower, 3 zucchini, and like half a bag of Brussels sprouts at one meal, and then some meat, like a little bit of meat. But I couldn't figure out why I had to take such high magnesium supplementation because I would have muscle cramps and toe cramps and all these kind of issues being a runner. And I'm like, I'm eating so much food that contains magnesium. How is this possible? But I really think that now looking back on it, I was just as quick as it was coming in, it was being pulled out. And now that I've been doing this for 3 months, I don't even have to take magnesium anymore, unless I really have
fascinating.
a high endurance run one day or something. But I don't need it. I don't get toe cramps. I don't get muscle cramps. I don't have trouble sleeping. Like all of that has gone away because I'm keeping what I'm getting in my meat. I'm keeping it in my body. I'm not flushing it out. So totally agree.
Right. As to vitamin C, the vitamin C recommendation is a lot of it, the the RDA right now is supposed to be reflecting two things: the amount that's there to prevent scurvy, which is very small, like I think 10 grams, and then the rest of it is just based on this idea that maybe we actually need more antioxidants. It's very vague.
Mm.
So the thing that's really interesting about vitamin C is that the uptake of vitamin C in cells goes on the same receptor as glucose, and so they're
Mhm.
kind of in competition. And if you suddenly are taking away all that glucose that you would have on a high carb diet, it seems that the amount of vitamin C that is necessary to meet all your needs becomes much lower because it's not in
Mm.
competition anymore.
That's interesting.
The other thing about vitamin C is that if you go to your standard USDA database to find out how much vitamin C you're getting, especially on a carnivorous diet, it's going to tell you that beef contains no vitamin C. And
Right.
that's just flat out wrong.
Right.
If you look at the publication, there's big long publications that go with all the RDAs showing where they came up with them, and there are tables that show how they measured for each thing, how much of each nutrient is in there. And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the table for vitamin C in beef, it says 0 and the little footnote saying assumed 0. So they never actually measured it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just crazy because they didn't do it with fish. They acknowledged that fish has some vitamin C. And just historically, it was known by Arctic explorers that meat would cure scurvy.
Mm.
So it's a kind of pull your hair out thing that people think, oh, you're not going to get any vitamin C when you eat
Well, yeah,
beef.
and trying to erase the dogma and the whiteboard that's full of these cultural and societal pressures of eating. It's like it's really daunting. Like especially coming from a nutritionist standpoint, knowing what I know now about how nutritious, even more so, meat is than vegetables. To try to tell people that and to try to get across from it is very daunting. Like they don't take it right away. So that's why I'm trying to do these podcasts with people like you that really say, we're not crazy. Like look this stuff up for yourself. We're not making this up. It's all out there. It's just you have to do your homework. You have to dig for it a little bit. And it makes logical sense to me too when you think about the fact that a cow is eating grass, which contains a lot of vitamin C. So it stands to reason that it's going to be in the muscle. Am I correct?
I don't know about the vitamin C content of grass, but definitely cows need it. So they're, they
I would
must
just
be getting
assume
it
since
from
it's
what
a
they're
plant,
eating.
just like a lot of the plants that we would eat, I would assume that since grass is also a plant, that it would contain the kind of similar quantities of like a green that we would eat as far as vitamin C. So,
It's an interesting point because when you think about when you're eating meat, you're eating the flesh of another animal, and that animal already, if they're a healthy animal, has the nutrient contents of everything that they need, which is
Right.
going to be very similar to what we need. So
Right.
there's this very easy parallel, all the nutrients in their body in proportion to their whole body we eat, right? So whatever you need in your muscles, you can get from their muscles. Whatever you need in your brain, you can get from their brain. But they, as herbivores, got it from plants. And so they had to do this much more complex physiological thing that has to do sometimes with the microbes that they're housing, and how and different conversions that they might be much better at than we are as humans to
Hmm.
convert, for example, different fatty acids to the ones that they need and that we need.
Yeah.
Um, Conversion to DHA, for example, is very difficult in humans from ALA, for example,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
but not so for them. If you're going to get really reductionist about it, I've heard vegans, for example, say to me, well, where do you think they got it from? As if my body is going to be able to do the same thing that
Right.
a
We
cow's
don't have
body can
four
do.
stomachs or four
Right.
chambers, you
And
know?
if you take that logic to its end, you could say, well, where did the plants get it from? They
Right.
got it from the sunshine, so maybe I should just sit in the sun, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
And the fact that the cows are actually eating small bugs while they're eating grass. So, I mean, they're not totally herbivores. They are eating small little animals that are bugs and organisms. So, I mean, there's that. I don't
that's
want to
true.
take up too much more of your time. You've been so generous today. So, but
I'm
I
so
do.
happy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I hope we'll do this again because I have like loads more to ask you. But um, I do want to let you tell people how they can find you. I know you have some really great blogs that I love to read. And so if you'll share that with them, then also maybe any speaking engagements coming up where maybe somebody could possibly, get to hear you firsthand.
Sure, thanks for asking. So I have two blogs, which is kind of funny historically speaking, but I had one that I started called ketotic.org, KETOTIC.org.
Hmm.
And on that one, I am mostly kind of pursuing ideas on the scientific edge where I didn't understand something that was going on in a ketogenic diet and wanted to explore it, and wrote down what I found about it.
Hmm.
And then, because I wanted to keep those ideas separate from meat eating, which at least the all meat diet thing is not supported by science in the same way. We're kind of pioneers here.
Right.
And so I started my own blog that was just more about experiences of eating this way and ideas I came across for it. And that one's called Empirica, with the .ca on the end. And
Yeah, and I'll put those in the show notes too so people can look those up. She even has recipes for, I think it was pork fat hollandaise I saw recently. So
yes,
I'll
yeah.
just leave it at that so people can go check that out because that looked really good. I'm going to try that.
It is pretty good.
Awesome. And
Um,
anywhere else about the speaking engagements or anything?
sure, yeah, the last place that I spoke was at Low Carb Breckenridge, which was a fantastic conference. I
Yes, I
really
think I
enjoyed it.
saw that one on YouTube too. So that was great.
It's not yet on YouTube,
Oh,
but
maybe
if
it was
you
a different
are
one.
subscribed to Diet Doctor,
Okay.
those were released freely through
Well,
Diet
which one did I
Doctor.
see on YouTube? What were you? You were at something maybe with like I just remember seeing you on some low carb session. Do you know what that would have been?
I went to Keto Fest and
Oh, that's what
spoke
it
about
was.
carnivory, and
Yes.
that
Okay.
I've also spoken at the Ancestral Health Symposium a couple
Okay. I
of
think I
times,
saw
and at
that one too.
KetoCon.
Oh,
The
okay.
next thing that I'll be speaking at is in Hungary. I'm so excited about this. I
Ah,
was invited to the Paleo Medicina group in Hungary, where they have a clinic where they treat people with all meat diets. And
awesome.
so they're having an open house, and they've invited me to speak.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I wish that I could be a fly on the wall there because that's going to be an amazing conference. So you'll have to tell me all about it, and hopefully you will come back and join me again sometime because I've had a really great time talking with you. So,
I would love that.
yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, make sure you follow her. She's on Twitter too. I think you're Keto Carnivore on Twitter as well. And then
That's
do you
right.
have Instagram too?
I do. I'm under Ambimorph,
Okay.
Ambimorph.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Amber, and we will talk again soon.